So Brett, in the '80s, a lot of things were happening with technology that really transformed the whole industry, and it's sort of the start of what we have today, which is, yeah, I guess, a democratization
Yep.
of music, where everybody now can create music.
Yep. So I think now in this time, as we're recording this 2022, it almost seems we take this for granted that it's so easy to record yourself. You can go online. There's a million applications from your phone. It has much more power than any of these things here. But prior to these devices coming out, you really had to have a recording studio. You had to have a huge apparatus to make a recording for yourself, and that required you to be usually have a contract with a record company or be independently wealthy, and just own a recording studio. But it was a big deal to try to get things recorded. A lot of live music, what people were discovered. That's why they had so many talent people out there looking for acts to have them record, because they hadn't recorded, but they'd be doing stuff live. And then we started to get to where you could do this relatively affordably in your own bedroom. And maybe the first iteration of that was the reel-to-reel recording thing we talked about before.
Right.
And this would have been the tape from these reel-to-reels. And then we kept progressively sort of got smaller and smaller until we're in a fully digital medium. But this was sort of the beginning of this revolution.
Yeah. So in the studio days, the machines were super expensive, and they used this kind of tape to record lots of channels. So this is a reel of analog tape, similar to what I showed you in the episode on analog tape. But in this case, it's really wide. So this is 2-inch wide analog tape. And this would hold 16 to 24 channels of audio, depending on how the machine was formatted and how the recording heads were stacked up. But it's really heavy. A roll of this tape runs around $200 or $250 just for I think it's about 40 minutes of music you can record on one of these big reels. So if you're recording an album, the tape costs alone could be in the thousands of dollars.
And that's not counting inflation.
That's right. That's right.
So it's probably more in today's dollars, 1,500 or something, something like that.
Oh, absolutely. So that was in that rarefied atmosphere of a recording studio with professionals doing everything for you. So that really changed with the advent of cassette tapes.
Yep.
So cassettes were used all the time by record labels as a release medium because they were small, they were inexpensive, and they would hold you could get you could have 60-minute ones, or you could do 120 minutes on these. So they hold a lot of information, and it's just tiny little tape. It's only about 1/8 of an inch wide, and so all the album releases would be on vinyl, but they would also do a cassette release, and these became very popular. Do you remember when the Sony Walkman came out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The Sony Walkman, and there was another couple of companies that did that. But that was revolutionary to have something, your Walkman, which was, again, seems antiquated now. But, it was the tape player that you could play a tape on and listen to music. One tape, mind you, and you had to fast forward and rewind if you wanted to listen to something, and it took 30 seconds or something to get to what you wanted to hear. So it's nothing like the iTunes of today, but that was probably the early iteration of the of the iPod, because and everyone had one. It was omnipresent out there.
Yeah, so those were the players, but people started making them pretty high quality as recording devices. So this is one. This is probably from the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So this is more of a professional cassette recording deck, and it has meters so you can see what kind of level is going on to the tape. You had inputs for microphones, or you could do some line inputs from it. You could choose all sorts of things on terms of what kind of tape you're using and optimize it.
Mm-hmm.
And it would record, again, just a two-channel stereo program on one of these nice little cassette tapes that were super cheap and super handy.
And one of the interesting and fun things about this era was that it was fun to discover what you could do with these things. There was no internet, so your buddy would tell you, oh, you gotta change this setting or connect. I remember connecting, taking two 4-tracks and making an 8-track.
Yeah.
The two Tascam 424s, and all this stuff was very. It wasn't as prescribed as it is now, where you just plug something into a digital medium and it does it for you. You kind of had to finagle a little bit. So it was I don't know. I kind of I look back with a little nostalgia because there's sort of something kind of cool about it. So
yeah. So the next big revolution was made by a couple companies came out with ways to record 8 channels on one of these little cassettes. And Tascam made a unit called the Porta Studio. And I know you and I both had Tascam Porta Studios.
Tascam 424, yep. I remember it well.
And what you could do with that was, what's really common today is you could stack up several channels of audio.
Yep.
So if we were playing our guitars, we could play one track and then listen to the playback and add another channel so we could play duets with ourselves and stack that up 8 times.
And that was just radical for the time. That was just such a crazy thing to be able to do. And again, the cost of it, I remember, I think mine was $900 in 1992 or something. And it was like a phenomenal deal, even though it was just fantastically expensive in those dollars. Again, with inflation, it probably was something much more. But it was just so crazy, and it had sliders and all this really really cool stuff where you can manipulate each track, and a lot of new features for everybody to play around with. So
and it had a lot of quality. Madonna's first album was done on a Tascam Porta Studio.
Yep.
So you could get high quality. And it's just crazy to think that you could get 8 channels on that tiny little swatch of a cassette tape.
Yep. And again, this with iPhones and everything else, it doesn't seem like much now, but it was pretty radical for the time. So.
Okay, so concurrent with a lot of this was the production of CDs as a media, which was the first consumer-based digital, widely used digital distribution methods. And CDs, after they made the standard, it's just a stereo track that is represented by little ones and zeros, and you can, with a laser inside the player, it would read the ones and zeros and reconstruct that to form the sound waves that we've talked about in several of our videos.
And one of the things that was at that time the big disadvantage from the people who were making music was that you could not record on it. Initially you did not. Again, you kind of went back to that model where the recording studio could do that, but you could not. You could play the CDs, and there was, and then they started to come out with ways to burn those. From computer to computer. I remember having 2 CDs, and my that's probably in the late 90s. But before that was the big disadvantage. But the sound quality was just superior in every way, and didn't wear out. The tapes do wear out because they're a physical physical item. So
Yeah, and the oxide on the tape just
Yep.
wears off. But the advantage of digital is that it, like you say, it can be reproduced over and over again because it's just numbers that are being transferred, and there's not a physical media.
Yep.
So record labels still controlled all that flow with digital recording. The recorders were ridiculously expensive, and in the $50,000 to $100,000 price range for one of those digital machines, and then that changed. Some companies got together and developed what's called digital audio tape, called DAT, and DAT is just a type of media, and it allows you to record 2 channels of stereo in a digital format onto tape. So this is one of the little portable players that probably around, this was in the 1990s that these came about. They had incredible sound quality compared to audio cassettes. They were super clean because it was digital. And inside here, there was a little head that would whirl around, very similar to what's used in VHS tapes, that allowed you to write tons of digital data on one of these tapes. You could get these up to, I think, 120 minutes of high quality stereo on one of these little DAT tapes. And as you can see, they're starting to get smaller already. The original ones were big studio models, and then they started getting smaller.
Yeah, and that's kind of a theme of all recordings, probably all technology. We're sitting here with a high quality camera here that's something that would have been 20 times this size. And same thing with these. They started to make the devices that would play these and record on these were almost the size of the tape. Before they started to get to completely no tape at all, a completely digital medium. But its size of these things have always shrunk, and I'm always curious to see what the recording studio in 20 years will look like, because I suspect it's going to be very, very tiny. Everything will be just incredibly compact, and it's my guess.
Yeah. So this started a process, but it still was not in the hands of the public to do digital until a couple companies came out with a way of using VHS tape to do a similar kind of thing. So this is sort of a standard VHS kind of cartridge. So both Tascam and Alesis came out with a way of writing 8 channels of digital audio on one of these VHS units. And it would just stick in here like a standard, looks like a VHS deck back from the old days. And you could do the same thing then as with the Porta Studios. And it had 8 channels, but it was super high quality digital audio that you were writing. So it became a professional standard. And boy, an amazing number of hit records were produced using either the Alesis or the Tascam units.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, there's, and that again, this was something that you could now, again, giving more power to the average random person to play with this. It made a whole new ball game, and people were starting to self-produce their stuff. And this is just at the early onset of the internet too.
Yes, as it turns out.
Which changed everything too, to where people could start to actually put their music and distribute it without the infrastructure that was needed prior to that. So
another innovation of both of these kinds of consoles is that you could connect them together. So you could connect 8 of these units together. So that would end up with 64 channels of audio, which was just unheard of at the time.
Yep.
And even the big studios in those days were 24 track.
Yep.
Sometimes they would chain 2 of those machines together to get 48.
Yep.
But here, for a fraction of the cost, you could get 64 channels
Yeah.
of incredible digital quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember seeing those pictures of the studios with the boards with all the sliders. You know, those big studios would have these huge, you know, massive, and that was, again, it was all getting smaller, and you could do a lot of this just with something like this. So,
And then, as we've already talked about, now we have more powers on our mobile devices
Yep.
than all of this stuff combined.
yep, it's something else for a $4 application. You can defeat all of this. So
Right. And, plus computer programs and apps. You have all sorts of power that we could only dream about.
yes,
And those, those studios that were $1 million studios, now we have the power on our phones for, $1,000. You can get
Yes.
the same quality by buying some microphones. And
yep. It's something else. So this was this chapter of this music. Listen to that with that kind of ear, because this was a very quickly changing environment with technology.
Yeah, and it was exciting times, as I remember.
Yes, me too.
Very good. Well, enjoy the chapter.